She is the most impressive resume in Real Housewives of Beverly Hills history. Apple Music, Uber, Endeavor, Netflix for Suite roles, a Harvard Business School case study, a memoir, a Forbes #1 ranking, an induction into the Marketing Hall of Fame. She is also by the documented record of her own career, a woman who has left a trail of incomplete tenures, unresolved departures, and carefully managed narratives. Let's look at the full picture. Here's the thing about Bozoma Saint John that the show has never wanted to address directly, and that the public narrative built around her brand has worked very hard to keep from becoming the central question. The gap between the image and the record. The image is extraordinary. She is Ghanaian American. She grew up between Accra, Nairobi, and Colorado Springs, navigating the specific difficulty of a Black girl in a predominantly white conservative community, where being nimble and bright was, in her own words, the best way to survive. She watched Spike Lee's advertising agency from an answering phone to becoming an executive. She spent nearly a decade at PepsiCo building the music and entertainment marketing division from the ground up. She has overseen campaigns involving Beyoncé, LeBron James, and Taylor Swift. She lost her husband Peter St. John to Burkitt's lymphoma in 2013, a rare aggressive cancer that took him within months of the diagnosis. And she rebuilt her life and her career around the philosophy she developed in the aftermath: urgency. Do not waste time. Move toward what matters. Live as fully as possible with whatever remains. That is a compelling story. It is also the story she has told on her own terms to her own audiences in a memoir she controlled on a reality television show that invited her specifically because she radiates the kind of competence and warmth that most franchises spend decades trying to manufacture. Forbes named her the most influential CMO in the world in 2021. Harvard Business School wrote a case study on her career titled Leading with Authenticity and Urgency. Andy Cohen gave her a diamond. But the record of her actual career, the part you have to read sideways through trade press and departures and the specific language of professional statements, tells a story that sits uncomfortably against all of that. Let us start with Netflix because Netflix is the most recent and most documented example, and because it is the one case where the gap between the official story and the behind-the-scenes account has been most specifically reported. Bozoma Saint John joined Netflix as Chief Marketing Officer in August 2020. She was described at the time of hire as someone who brought both creative firepower and cultural authority to a company that was fighting for relevance in a streaming war it was beginning to lose ground in. She was the first Black SOID executive in Netflix history. The package she negotiated was reportedly worth approximately $7 million. Ted Sarandos, Netflix's co-CEO, called her a transformative hire. She left in March 2022 after 22 months. The departure statement from both sides was studiously warm. "I've loved working with Boss and have been inspired by her creativity and energy." Sarandos said she has attracted world-class marketers to the company and encouraged them to be innovative leaders. She responded with equal grace, saying the experience had been transformative and that she was grateful. Then came the actual reporting. Multiple trade publications, including The Hollywood Reporter and Industry Observers, who spoke to people inside Netflix, published accounts of what had produced the departure. The specific allegations were not about strategic disagreements or creative differences. The language used when a CMO and a company genuinely part ways on professional grounds. They were about a pattern of behavior that had been building across the tenure. Specifically, that Bozoma had been spending a substantial amount of her time at Netflix building and promoting her personal brand rather than focusing on the company's marketing needs. She was running the Badass Workshop, a paid online platform she marketed to aspiring executives while serving as CMO of one of the largest media companies on the planet. She was leading a program at Harvard Business School. She was pursuing a memoir. Reports suggested she had also been negotiating a potential relocation to Paris, a city where Netflix has a significant office, but where a CMO, whose primary responsibilities involve leading teams across Los Angeles and New York, would naturally create friction with the co-CEO. Three of her senior marketing executives at Netflix were fired in July 2021 for communicating what was described as mean office gossip about their colleagues on the company's internal Slack platform. Netflix officially denied that St. John was among those criticized in the messages. The fact that it was reported at all that the departure of senior marketing staff under her tenure generated enough internal tension to produce leaked communications is itself a data point in a pattern. When Bozoma was asked directly about the reporting that she had prioritized her personal brand over her corporate responsibilities, her response was, "Here's the thing. I live out loud." She continued, "I recognize that there are not a lot of Black women who are in these positions. In these spaces, there's nothing about me that is like anybody else. I recognize that I'm going to be talked about, and sometimes I'm going to be talked about negatively because there's not an understanding of where I'm coming from, the culture I represent, the ways that I am, and those things feel like friction." This is a very carefully constructed answer. It is true that Black women in executive positions are subjected to scrutiny that their white counterparts do not receive. That is documented and real and important. It is also an answer that does not engage with the specific allegation being made that she was running paid side businesses and building her personal platform while being compensated $7 million to lead marketing for a company. Those two things are not the same criticism. One is about race and visibility. The other is about professional focus. She answered the first while leaving the second entirely unrest. Her Uber tenure produced a similar pattern. She left Uber after less than 2 years as chief brand officer. When she addressed that departure publicly at South by Southwest in 2019, she described finding a lot of people who had a desire to do better honestly but couldn't get out of their own way. She said the environment was too overwhelming for her. She described herself as having tried to be the savior of a challenging culture. What she did not specifically address was the question of whether her own conduct or approach had contributed to the difficulty. A question that the subsequent Netflix reporting would make slightly more pointed in retrospect. What the full career arc reveals is a woman who has risen very high, very fast on the basis of a personal brand that is extraordinarily well constructed, and who has departed each major corporate role within approximately 2 years without a fully satisfying explanation for why the tenure ended when it did. Pepsi was the exception. She stayed nearly a decade. The subsequent corporate roles have each lasted around 18 to 24 months. Netflix in 22 months, Uber in less than 2 years. Endeavor for a similar period before Netflix. The pattern of short tenures is not disqualifying on its own. Executive mobility is real and common at this level. But the specific nature of the criticism that followed the Netflix departure and the specific way she chose to answer it suggests something worth examining. Now, here is where the RHOB angle becomes genuinely interesting, because the show has given Bozoma Saint John something that the corporate world kept trying to define on its own terms, and she has used it with considerable skill. She joined the cast in season 14 as the only new full-time diamond holder, which is a position that requires immediate establishment of identity, or the cameras will simply edit around you. She established hers with efficiency. The personal brand she has spent years constructing, competent, glamorous, emotionally intelligent, open about grief and resilience and urgency, translated to the RHOB format almost perfectly. Viewers who knew her from the Apple Music WWDC presentation in 2016, where her on-stage confidence had generated its own cultural moment, recognized a version of that confidence in the season 14 footage. She was the most impressive-seeming person on a show that has always been about the performance of impressiveness. But season 15 began revealing the edges. The Amanda Frances mask moment is the most specific example available. In Florence, Italy, during a group outing in episode 14, Kathy Hilton spotted a street vendor selling Venetian masks. In her confessional, Bozoma said she remarked that one of them was an Amanda. Beezy initially denied having made the comment. When Natalie confirmed she had heard it, Bozoma shifted. She told Amanda in a poolside confrontation that her issue was with Amanda's unwillingness to be honest about her actual life. Amanda said in the after show that she realized Bozoma was hoping the microphone's not that strong. The specific sequence, a shaded comment, a flat denial, A forced acknowledgement once confirmation arrived is not the behavior of the openly authentic executive that the brand suggests. It is the behavior of someone who makes strategic moves in social settings and then recalibrates when they are caught. The season 15 reunion confirmed that Bozoma herself acknowledged tension with multiple cast members. She told US Weekly at the iHeartRadio Music Awards that the reunion involved unresolved tension and specifically listed Dor and Kyle, Dorit and Erica, Dorit and Sutton, Dorit and Amanda, and then in her own words, me and Amanda, me and Kyle a little bit. She described the day as a tough one and said it felt like a very big therapy session. This is a Season 2 cast member who arrived with the most compelling professional biography on the show, describing a reunion in which she had not resolved her conflicts with half the cast. In episode 12, Bozoma said in confessional, "I made a very strategic decision separating Dor from Kyle and Amanda. Okay, that was a good decision. Let her come on her own." She organized the flight groups at LAX and the room assignments at the villa with the explicit stated purpose of controlling who had access to whom and when. This is not warmth or authenticity. This is game playing of the Lisa Vanderpump variety executed by someone who has been publicly positioned as too real and too direct for that kind of calculation. The confessional made it transparent. She volunteered that it was strategic. But the brand she has constructed is one built on the opposite of strategic social management. There is one more element to the Bozoma Saint John story that deserves to be addressed directly because it is the element that the show has treated most sympathetically and that the public narrative has centered most heavily. The grief. Peter St. John died in 2013. His death was real and the loss was real. And what Boz has said about navigating widowhood and single parenthood while building a career under those circumstances is genuinely moving. Her memoir, The Urgent Life, is built around this grief and around the philosophy it produced. She has spoken about it with consistency and with evident depth. No part of this is in question. What is worth examining is how the grief has functioned within her personal brand. Specifically, whether there is a distinction to be drawn between a woman who has lived through grief and processes it publicly because that is her authentic way of moving through the world and a woman who has identified grief as the most compelling element of a narrative she is actively marketing. The Urgent Life was published in February 2023. It arrived less than a year after her Netflix departure and was received as the logical next chapter of a career pivot. She had left corporate America and was now publishing a grief memoir, teaching at Harvard and running the Badass Workshop. The memoir positioned her grief, her marriage, her widowhood, and her resilience as the foundation of her professional wisdom. The thing that made her marketing career legible as more than just ambition. Without the loss, she has said herself, the career does not make sense. There is no me as the so-eyed executive 4 times over without having gone through my husband's short life. That is a profound statement. It is also a statement that makes the grief load-bearing in the personal brand. And when the personal brand is load-bearing in a career, when it is what gets you hired at Netflix without a traditional resume, what gets you the Harvard case study, what gets you the RH Diamond, it becomes impossible to separate the authentic processing of loss from the strategic deployment of it. Bozoma herself would probably not draw a distinction between those things. She has said explicitly that she does not experience her professional self and her personal self as separate. I Live Out Loud is not just her response to the Netflix criticism. It is the organizing principle of everything she presents publicly. The Badass Workshop, the memoir, the WWDC presentation, the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. They're all the same project in her telling, the project of living urgently, openly, fully after loss. The dark truth about Bozoma Saint John is not that any one of these things is false. The grief is real. The career is real. The loss of her Malibu home in the January 2025 Palisades fire, found out on X while she was in Zambia, a beachfront house she paid $5.2 million for, and said she had worked 25 years to get, and bought in a trust within a trust specifically because she believed racist neighbors would have blocked the sale of a beachfront property to a widowed Black woman. That is real, too, and genuinely painful in ways that resist easy analysis. The dark truth is a more uncomfortable one. That the gap between the public story and the private record is larger than the brand allows for. That the career pattern, multiple short tenors, exits with polished statements and reported friction. A pattern of prioritizing personal visibility over institutional commitment is in tension with the image of total authenticity that the brand projects. That the strategic Italy Group separation, confessionally acknowledged as deliberate, is in tension with the image of someone who does not play that kind of game. The show chose Bozoma Saint John because her resume made her seem like the most complete person who had ever sat at the Beverly Hills table. The resume is real. What the cameras are beginning to show in season 15 and at the reunion that followed it is that the complete person contains some things the brand has not made room for yet. Multiple corporate exits in under 2 years each. Reports of personal brand building while on a $7 million CMO contract. A masked comment she initially denied until the witness confirmed it. A strategic Italy Group split she volunteered in confessional. The most impressive resume in franchise history. And questions the brand hasn't answered. Subscribe for